And my initial question here, why do we care about stone tools? Maybe we don't care. Maybe stone tools make us sick. Maybe I got the least attendance and the least number of quizzes because we don't care about stone tools. Who cares about stone tools? I guess I don't care much about them either. When it comes down to it, I've never liked them at all. Stone tools. Does anybody care about stone tools? Can I convince you to care? Why should we care? So boring, stone tools. So Flintstone. Can't care. All right. Well, some people do care about stone tools. They're not here, obviously. The reason people care about stone tools, or the archaeologists, is that it's the earliest evidence that we have of culture or material culture, stuff that we can say, wait a second, people are transmitting, learning, passing on traditions. And this may have been happening before stone tools. In fact, it probably was happening before stone tools. But all the sticks and the wood and the vegetation has all disappeared, but stone tools are still there and you can find them. And you can say, we now have a date and a time that we know that culture comes into the archaeological record, and people began to depend more on learned behavior for their existence and for their survival. The problem with stone tools is, and that's why they're so boring, is that sometimes it's hard to tell what is a stone tool and what's just a rock lying on the ground that might have gotten cracked or fallen or shaped that way just because it fell off somewhere. And so archaeologists spend a lot of time trying to figure out, well, is this really a stone tool? Did somebody try and make this? Do the cracks on this tool, are they shaped in some way so that it seems that somebody has done this? Or is it just something that fell off some other rock? So that's one way you look, and people spend a lot of time, years, just looking at these things under microscopes to try and tell if they've been shaped by hands. And then you would look at the bones, if you can find the bones, the hand bones around the places where stone tools might have been used or manufactured, to see if the creatures around there have your opposable thumbs and things that might have the hand capacity to do tool use. And what it would really is really great to find, but it's incredibly rare to find, is if you can find that they've been using these stone tools to butcher or cut up other animals, animal bones, then you got something. But like I said, this is a pretty rare. It's great if you can find this, then you're really happy because you have intentional stone tool use and you can actually prove that these were used for something. But it's rare to find all these things together, and especially the last one. So start caring about stone tools, damn it. The earliest stone tools. The earliest stone tools are what we call the Oldowan tools, because of where they were found in Olduvai Gorge. So we got around 2.6 million years ago. How'd they make these tools? What should we use these for? Actually, that looks dangerous, doesn't it? It's like you might hurt yourself. What would we use these for? That's a hard question, by the way. It's not, there's a lot of debate about what the hell they were doing with these stone tools. Any ideas? Actually, very difficult to kill an animal with that stone tool. It's got a sharp edge, it is true, but not useful for killing an animal, really. It probably the best bet, although there's a lot of debate about these, what the early stone tools were used for. Maybe the best hypothesis now, the humans, the little puny humans on the African savanna were probably not hunting animals as much as they might have been, one, looking out for being hunted by animals, because you don't want to pop your head up and have a lion get you. But what people think is that these early groups were able to use these tools to go in after something was killed by, so let's say you have a giraffe or a zebra or something that was killed by a lion, and they eat the meat, and then the little hominins would run in with their stone tools and get the bones and crack open the bones and be eating the marrow from the bones and the stuff that these other animals might not care so much about. Again, a lot of debate because it's hard to tell exactly what was going on with these stone tools. Hard to say. So this is called flint knapping, and it's not as easy as it seems. Although some of these stone tools do look boring, and they look like rocks. It's not, if you try to do this, like I said, it's hard to do. It's actually takes some skill to do it. And what it indicates is that humans, some anthropologists have said that what was distinctive is it brings in what we call apprentice style learning. So as you see from videos of chimps and monkeys and other primates, they watch their group and they learn from them. But humans are unique in that we really get in our with our children and others, we have a very hands-on approach to learning. And so you actually put the tools in somebody's hands and you help them with the striking motion, and it transmissive bond between you, sometimes parent and child, or older and younger, or peer groups, in which you learn through what we might call experiential learning by doing it, but by doing it with somebody who already knows how to do it, so you were an apprentice to that person. So again, this is a pretty big transition in human history to start using these stone tools and start doing things with them. Recently, though, there have been some interesting observations of different monkeys and what they do with some of these stones. These are capuchin monkeys. I remember what kind of monkey capuchin monkeys would be. These are the monkeys in the Americas. They're actually found in Brazil. And they found these monkeys just banging stones together and making things that when you looked at them, you can't tell. The archaeologists couldn't tell the difference between the monkey banging these stones together, apparently just to lick them, and what they called human stone tools. And then they say, so then if we find stone tools, there are two possibilities. One possibility is that it's just monkey unintentionally banging rocks together. The other possibility is that it's humans intentionally making a stone tool. However, there's a third possibility. What would that be? There's a third possibility. Maybe there's four possibilities now. There's four possibilities. Who's to take away the intentionality of the monkeys? They have their reasons for doing things. They're doing things intentionally. Maybe they like the sound. Maybe they like the taste. They seem to maybe like the minerals. So who's to say that's not intentional? Looks pretty intentional to me. Looked like that monkey was acting for us, looking at the camera every so often, showing off. Very intentional. Anyway, that's good. There's a fourth possibility then. Yeah, right. What? Oh, now we got five possibilities. I'm too mean. Okay, there's at least five possibilities. They only came up with two. Mine was gonna say, how about the unintentional humans? Maybe those humans were banging those rocks together and licking them off for the minerals. Who knows? Intentionality. They might have been unintentional as well. So anyway, it does give us pause about what those humans were up to back then. Wow, expanded out to five possibilities. Oh, there we go. So we have the early tool producers. Who were the early tool producers? We have these Oldowan tools that we talked about around 2.6 million years ago. At first, we thought those were assigned to Homo habilis, handyman, the handy human. But as your textbook says, people now debate that. Were they made by Homo habilis or not? Because we know that the so-called Gona tools from 2.5 million years ago seem to be made by Australopithecus gari. The A is just an abbreviation for an australopith. not the Homo habilis or whatever Homo was back then. So we know that some monkeys can bang stones together that start looking like tools. And we also know that Australopithecus gari, maybe other Australopithecus, Paranthropus or Australopithecus, the robust Australopiths, they could have all been making tools independently. So it's these early tools, it's ambiguous, but we do know that across some of these early species, they were in place. Now, what this means to us, or the importance, as we go back to what we've said at the beginning, is the importance of cultural learning. Many primates, as we just saw, have this basic tool use, which means they can do some basic problem solving and learning from each other about how to do these things. What's that macaque monkey doing?
Flossing with human hair that was pulled out of people's heads.
Oh man, this is so disturbing. Yes, there are populations of macaque monkeys. Some of them hang around certain temples where humans like to go, and then they get on the human head and pull out a little hair and use it to floss their teeth. Better than most humans, probably, if you've been to the dentist and the dentist has told you to floss. How many people do it? But the macaques know how to do it. There they go. Now, better than the macaques, what do the chimpanzees do? Yeah, they seem to be able to do termite fishing with sticks and use rocks and do different things in different groups. So much so that what do we call this when chimpanzees are passing on? Cultural transmission. So with chimpanzees and some of these other primates, what we see is they can pass this on from generation to generation, and they can develop different traditions in different groups. So on one side of the river, the chimpanzees know how to crack nuts with rocks, and on the other side, they don't really have that adaptation, or they have different grooming patterns. And so this seems to be different cultural groups that form according to their transmission of traits. Now with humans, what do we do that might be a little better than this? Cumulative culture. Yeah. So with humans, there's obviously cultural transmission, but we tend to build upon things, refine them, talk about them, make things better, and make this add up into a more cumulative way of doing things. And it's really our bipedalism plus having this cumulative culture, which is what is going to allow some of the Homo species to spread out into all different areas of the world. And eventually we were going to find Homo sapiens spreading out into all kinds of areas of the world that they weren't before. And they are not going to change that much biologically. Of course, we did look at some climate changes and sunlight changes as they move into different areas, but they're going to be able to survive because they adapt their tools to the environment and alter the environment in such a way that it's adaptable so that the Homo sapiens can live in what we might consider extreme environments where we might not have seen them before. High altitude, Arctic zones, different kinds of tropical and deserts. So this is what really, this combination of mobility from bipedalism plus having cumulative culture is what gives the Homo sapiens perhaps most of its advantage in terms of spreading out in different places in the world. Now, as we get to the end of the chapter, they start talking to us about the importance of narrative for paleoanthropology. We talked about the scarcity of fossil evidence and how you have to tie things together. So it's very important that we come up with, but also revise a story or a narrative about how these things are tied together. So the story or the narrative that I just told you about cumulative culture plus bipedalism is trying to tie different fossil finds and different evidence that we have together into an explanation for why Homo sapiens would eventually spread out all over the place. Now, I want to be careful with our narratives because a lot of them, especially in the earlier days of anthropology, were very centered on these ideas of heroes, of man the hunter, of creatures coming out of the trees and striding onto the savannah with their big heads ready to do something cool. And so we want to be careful about these stories because they resemble these mythic creations that we have about the triumph of certain heroes. They're fun. They're more fun to listen to. They're perhaps more interesting, but they don't really tell us what's going on in human evolution. The other interesting thing here, yeah, so this is again, visual reconstructions are also a form of storytelling, trying to think about what kind of creatures lived in the past and what they might have looked like. Is that true? Is that what they all look like? Yeah, a lot of this is guesswork because skin color, by the way, if you have the bones of anybody, all of our bones do not tell us skin color. Despite what you might see on TV and the forensic anthropologists running around, our bones reveal nothing about our skin color or our hairiness. You cannot get any of that from bones. In fact, unless you're really trained, it's often difficult to tell male and female from bones. There's some subtle differences with people, but that too is something that you have to really know what you're doing. So bones and fossils really don't tell us anything about how much hair, how much, what color of skin you had. There's different ways you get that. And there's something else about this that I'd like to point out. When you think about creatures using stone tools, what images come to your mind? If I say, yeah, we found some people using stone tools, what kind of people would those look like? I know they look like these people, but let me just be blunt. What kind of gender attributes do you imagine when I say stone tools, especially in this voice? Who do you imagine using these stone tools? Men, right? Manliness is usually associated with stone tools. Now, again, I just want to point this out that in fact, when you look around at different societies today, oftentimes it is the women who are using and making the stone tools. Not always, not everywhere, but at least sometimes and in many places, and using them to scrape hides or do different manufacture. And so some people have proposed that it is actually woman the tool maker that we should be looking for in the past. Now, we can't tell anything about who was using and making the stone tools 1 million years ago, 2 million years ago. It's hard enough just associating that with a species, but, and we don't want to project from the present back to the past, but I just want to put this out there as a caution here because we often associate stone tool making with guy stuff, but didn't necessarily have to be, isn't in the present, at least when we look at today's societies who are using stone tools. And so this brings up an important point at the very end of the chapter, which is why it is important that there be diverse perspectives in paleoanthropology. So why might we want to have diversity in paleoanthropology other than just being nice people? Yeah.
A lot of different perspectives.
Different perspectives, right? So if you're just a bunch of guys sitting around thinking that guys work with stone tools, you're not going to have that different perspective. And so you might tell a biased story about the evidence. And the truth of the matter is that a lot of the early paleoanthropologists were these white guy hero types who were going into other countries and had big hats on and would be trying to find these fossils. And they'd all be like in a pissing contest about whether their fossil was the best fossil and whether their fossil was going to be the true human fossil, etc. And honestly, it isn't the best. If you have more perspectives, it's going to lead to better interpretations of the evidence. And especially in places that have been subject to colonial rule, you don't want to just be going in and digging things up and extracting them and taking them away to museums and other places. It would be nice. It'd be more than nice. It'd be ethical, right? If you had people from those regions who were not just helping, but directing the excavations and the interpretations. And so this is not just something that we do to encourage people, different kinds of people, to be involved in science. Bringing in these perspectives leads to better interpretations and better understanding. So there are more people now in these fields, not enough, but this is something that hopefully we are starting to change and be aware of some of these relationships when we do our science together.